All right, let's jump right into the kitchens of our great-grandmothers. A time when, believe it or not, feeding a family was an act of pure genius. Now, in this four-part explainer, we're not just digging up old recipes. We're actually uncovering a lost art of smart, resourceful cooking that has way more to teach us today than you might think.
And that idea right there, that is the key to this whole thing. You know, the picture we all have of Depression-era food is, well, it's pretty bleak. Lack, desperation. But the argument we're diving into completely reframes that. This story isn't about what they didn't have. It's about the incredible, practical knowledge they had.
I mean, this comparison really says it all, doesn't it? What was once this humble 3-cent staple that could feed an entire family is now being sold in fancy restaurants as polenta for 50 times the price. The ingredients are literally identical: cornmeal, water, salt. The only thing that's changed is how we see it, our perception of its value. It's wild.
Okay, so let's really explore the mindset behind these meals. What were the core principles that could turn just a few basic, cheap ingredients into something that could actually sustain a family and taste good too?
This was rule number one, the absolute foundation of everything. In a world with no giant grocery stores, no weekly trash pickup, every single scrap of food had a purpose. Waste wasn't just shameful, it was a direct threat to your family's survival. And that kind of pressure, well, it forces a level of creativity that we've mostly lost today. And here is a perfect, hands-on example of that principle. When you rendered lard from pork fat, which is just melting it down to use for cooking, you'd be left with these crispy, salty little bits. You'd never, ever throw those away. No way. They became cracklings, a totally free source of fat, salt, and amazing texture that turns simple cornbread into something deeply savory and rich. See? Every single part had a job to do.
And that zero-waste philosophy, it didn't stop with the animals. It went straight out to the garden plot. Being resourceful wasn't just about using the perfect, beautiful vegetables. No. It was about finding a delicious purpose for every bruised apple, every slightly misshapen potato, for anything that was about to be lost.
I just love this quote. It says it all. You know, before the first frost hit, any tomatoes still green on the vine weren't a failure. They were a bonus prize. Slicing them up, dredging them in cornmeal, and frying them in bacon grease wasn't something you looked up in a book. It was a reflex, an instinct. This knowledge was so deep, it was just like breathing.
So the really crucial point here is that this wasn't just about desperation. It was a complete culinary system, a masterclass in understanding your ingredients so intimately that you could pull amazing flavor and nutrition from things we now just toss in the trash without a second thought.
Okay, but this brings us to the big question that's probably hanging over all of this. It's one thing to admire the ingenuity, but were these super simple 3-ingredient meals, like pinto beans, salt pork, and cornbread, were they actually providing the nutrition a family needed to thrive? Or were they just barely scraping by?
Well, it turns out modern science decided to find out, and the results are, honestly, they're just stunning. They validate what these grandmothers seem to know in their bones, long before anyone had heard of a nutritional label or a dietary guideline.
So let's start with the money. A meal that could power a grown person through a whole day of hard labor costs less than 10 cents a serving. Now, keep that number in your head, because the truly incredible part is what you got for that dime.
So in 2017, the University of Georgia analyzed this exact meal. Pinto beans simmered with a little bit of salt pork, served alongside a piece of cornbread. And the data is it's amazing. This simple, dirt-cheap combination provided nearly all the daily requirements for protein, for fiber, iron, calcium, and B vitamins. It was a nutritional powerhouse, just hiding in plain sight.
And here it is. This is the knockout punch, right from the researchers themselves. This diet wasn't just good enough. It was, and I quote, nutritionally superior to the wave of processed convenience foods that took over American kitchens in the decades that followed. Grandma was feeding her family right all along. So, what on earth happened?
Well, because this knowledge didn't just fade away. It wasn't a passive thing. The central idea here is that this knowledge was actively and very successfully replaced by a totally new story about food, about progress, and about what a modern kitchen should be.
It is just staggering how fast this happened. In the span of a single generation, America went from being a nation that cooked from scratch to a nation that opened a can. And this timeline here points to 1953 as a major turning point, when the food industry launched this massive, coordinated campaign to completely change the way we eat.
And their strategy was, you have to admit, pretty brilliant. It wasn't just about selling a can of soup. It was about devaluing an entire skill set. They pushed this narrative that cooking from scratch was drudgery, that it was complicated and old-fashioned. They flooded magazines and radio shows with recipes where the main ingredient came from a can, and they framed it not as a shortcut, but as a form of modern liberation.
This whole shift is described with this incredibly powerful phrase, a generational theft. The idea is that this huge body of knowledge, passed down for centuries, was just quietly stolen from our kitchens. And it was replaced with a dependency on the supermarket aisle. It happened so quietly, so subtly, that we all just called it progress.
So as we wrap up part 1, it's pretty clear that what was lost here was so much more than just a few recipes for bean soup. It was a fundamental understanding of food itself.
And that leaves us with a really heavy question, doesn't it? When an entire generation is taught that competence in the kitchen just isn't necessary anymore, what are the long-term consequences of that? For our health, for our wallets, and for our connection to the very thing that keeps us alive?
You know, the best way to understand what was lost isn't just to listen to me talk about it, it's to experience it. So here's a direct challenge for you. Pick one of these simple 3-ingredient meals and just make it this week. Fry up some cornmeal mush for breakfast, or simmer a pot of beans. See for yourself what this forgotten knowledge actually feels and tastes like.
There is so much more to uncover here. In the next 3 parts of this series, we're going to dive deep into the actual meals themselves, from breakfast to supper to dessert. So if you found this as fascinating as I did, make sure you like this explainer and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Thanks for tuning in.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to part 2 of our series on the 30 forgotten 3-ingredient meals our grandmothers absolutely swore by. So in part 1, we kicked off this journey back to a time of incredible resourcefulness, and now we're going to pick it up right where we left off. Now, if you're just joining us, we're digging into the genius behind the simple, smart, and honestly often misunderstood food of the Depression era. For everybody who's been waiting for the next part, well, let's just dive right back into the countdown. And you know, that really is the heart of it, isn't it? This wasn't just about survival. This was food that was made with intention, with care, and with a kind of practical love that could turn the absolute humblest ingredients into a memory that would last a lifetime. All right, so let's keep this countdown rolling. We're diving into a section dedicated to meals born from pure necessity, kicking things off at number 22. These are the meals that were created when, well, the pantry was looking pretty bare, but ingenuity was absolutely overflowing. First up, we've got Hoover's stew. And you gotta love the irony, right? Named after the president that so many people blamed for the hard times. The ingredients were just about as basic as you could get. Some macaroni, a can of tomatoes, and, if you were really lucky, some sliced up hot dogs. What's really fascinating is the role this stew played in big cities. I mean, relief kitchens in places like New York and Chicago served this up to thousands of people. And just like that quote we started with, the kids who ate it, they often remembered it as pure comfort food, not as a sign of hardship. Okay, next on our list at number 21 is pot liquor and cornbread. So what went into it? Just 3 things. Collard greens, a piece of fat back to give it some flavor, and of course, the cornbread. You'd crumble right into that rich, savory broth. And this, right here, is such a perfect example of that forgotten wisdom we're talking about. See, the liquid that's left over after boiling the greens, that's the pot liquor. It's actually packed with more nutrients than the greens themselves. I mean, today we have scientists proving its value. Back then, it was just common sense. You just didn't waste a single drop of anything good. Coming in at number 20 is something called tomato gravy. For this, all you needed was a can of tomatoes, a little bit of flour to thicken it up, and some bacon drippings. This was the go-to solution for those mornings when the egg money had, well, already run out. This tangy, savory gravy would get poured over biscuits or mush or pretty much anything that needed a little kick of flavor. Somehow, it had this richness. It could make the simplest meal feel like an absolute feast. It just goes to show you that abundance is really just a matter of perspective sometimes. All right, let's skip ahead to number 18, where we find a dish that really captures the whole spirit of this thing, turning waste into want. It's bread pudding. The core ingredients? So simple. Just stale bread, some milk, and eggs. This was the ultimate kitchen magic trick. Yesterday's leftover bread, something you might have just tossed out, was totally transformed into a warm, custardy dessert for Sunday. And the craziest part? You can find this humble dish on fancy restaurant menus today for like $12 a slice. Grandma would have a real good laugh about that. So I know what you might be thinking. These are great stories, but are we just romanticizing tough times? Was this food actually, good for you, or was it just what people had to eat to get by? Well, the answer to that is pretty surprising. So we're actually going to hit pause on the countdown for just a second here, because what modern science has discovered about these meals is way too important to skip. Let's just call this section Grandma Science. Okay, so get this. A 2017 study from the University of Georgia took a hard look at these traditional Depression-era meals, and what they found was wild. A simple plate of pinto beans, greens, and cornbread was nutritionally superior to the processed convenience foods that have replaced it. It covered almost all the daily protein, fiber, and vitamins an adult doing heavy labor would need. So what's the big takeaway here? It's huge. The women who raised an entire generation on this food, they weren't just making do. They weren't cooking poorly. They were cooking smart. They were cooking right. We're the ones who've forgotten how. So with that in mind, with this new perspective, let's jump back into the countdown. And let's look at these next meals not just as recipes from hard times, but as incredible, proven examples of pure ingenuity. Jumping down to number 15, we've got one that, it might make you raise an eyebrow a little bit. The syrup sandwich. It's just white bread, some butter, and a drizzle of cane syrup. That's it. For so many kids, that was breakfast or lunch or just a quick snack. And look, before you judge this meal by its simple ingredients, this quote really gets to the heart of the matter. For the people who grew up eating these, the memory isn't just about the food. It's about the love that it was given with. That was the real recipe. All right, at number 14, we have an absolute powerhouse when it comes to stretching a dollar. Bean soup with ham hock. The ingredients, just some dried navy beans, a single ham hock, and water. A pot of this would just simmer away all day, filling the whole house with that incredible smell that meant something good was on its way. Think about this. One single ham hock and a pound of beans could feed a dozen people. Not just for dinner, but for lunch the next day too. And get this, for a cool piece of history, the famous Senate bean soup, which is still served in the U.S. Senate cafeteria to this very day, is a direct descendant of this exact pot of soup. How cool is that? So, as we start to wrap up this part of our journey, the main idea is becoming crystal clear. From Hoover stew all the way to Senate bean soup, these meals were not a sign of failure. They were the product of a deep, practical, and really powerful knowledge of how to feed a family well with next to nothing. We are getting so close to number 1. In part 3, we are going to reveal the top 10 most ingenious meals of them all, including one that scientists now say has more nutrition per penny than anything you've got in your pantry. So you are not going to want to miss it. Make sure you're subscribed and you've hit that notification bell. And that really leaves us with something to chew on, doesn't it? In our world of fast food and endless choices, what essential knowledge have we let slip away? We'll explore that more next time. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one. All right, welcome back. This is it, the third and final part of our explainer on those incredible 3-ingredient meals our grandmas absolutely swore by. We're picking up right where we left off, counting down the last few dishes that really prove that sometimes the most powerful ingredient you can have is just pure resourcefulness. But before we even jump back into the countdown, let's just start with this line. This is from our source material, and it was used to describe a woman who could make a feast out of, almost nothing. And I think it just perfectly captures the spirit behind every single one of these meals we're talking about. It's about strength. It's about ingenuity. Okay, let's dive in. We're picking up our countdown with 2 dishes from the American South that were so much more than just food. They were the absolute foundation of survival cooking for generations. Coming in at number 9, we have a meal that is honestly the bedrock of the pantry. Here it is. Our source calls this the holy trinity of Southern poverty food. And you can see why, right? It's a whole, comforting meal from just 3 things that could last all winter long. The real magic, of course, was in knowing exactly how to put them together. And what's so fascinating to me is the psychology of it all. As you can see here, with the right know-how, these 3 simple ingredients could create something that didn't just fill you up, it actually created a feeling of abundance, even on a morning when there was literally nothing else. Let's move on to number 8. This one wasn't just on the menu, it was a cultural constant. For 100 years, right across Appalachia and the rural South, this exact meal was on somebody's stove every single day. The beans would just simmer away for hours with a little piece of fat back, making their own delicious broth, and then you'd have that hot cornbread straight from the oven. And this quote just drives that point home, doesn't it? This wasn't just dinner. It was a nutritionally complete cornerstone of an entire culture. It sustained generations of families who lived long, healthy lives eating this exact combination. So next up, we're going to see how the idea of zero waste wasn't just about not being hungry. It was about transforming a basic survival food into something totally new, something you'd actually want to eat. And at number 7, we have the brilliant sequel to a dish we've seen before, fried mush. So the whole point here is the transformation. It's incredible. You take last night's plain old cornmeal mush, you let it get cold, slice it up, and then fry it in some grease. Suddenly, you've got a breakfast that feels like a special treat. The outside gets all crackly and golden brown, the inside stays soft, and apparently, kids actually ask for this stuff. Okay, the next few meals on our list, they showcase this almost magical ability to conjure up comfort, pride, and even dessert from the most humble ingredients you can possibly imagine. Sometimes ingredients that weren't even there. I mean, that sounds completely impossible, right? But when pride demanded that you put something on the table for your guests, when an empty plate just wasn't an option, our grandmothers, they found a way. And that brings us to the incredible answer at number 6, water pie. This was a testament to just refusing to admit defeat. It was a way to create a sweet, comforting dessert when the house was completely bare. And the woman who could make this, who could put a pie on the table when there was no food, well, like the source says, she was the strongest person in the room. All right, let's move on to number 5. This one is a meal that cost almost literally nothing. This was pretty much the entire game plan for working class cooking in a lot of the rural South for 200 years. You cook your rice, and then you make a gravy from whatever was left in the pan, the grease, those little brown bits, and you stretch it out with a little water. It was free flavor, and it fed people who went on to live full, good lives. And at number 4, we have a food whose wisdom is so much older than the Depression. We're talking centuries. This knowledge, according to our source, comes from Cherokee grandmothers. And it's such a simple but absolutely brilliant idea. You just fold cooked beans right into your cornmeal dough. Once you cook that, the beans and the cornmeal together form a complete, nourishing meal all by themselves. And this slide really shows you the genius of it. It didn't need anything else. No butter, no side dishes. It was a self-contained, sustaining food that kept a vital piece of cultural knowledge alive through some of the hardest times imaginable. So, as we're getting to the end of our list, it's pretty clear that this isn't just about recipes, is it? It's about what they represent. It's a priceless, practical kind of wisdom that, for the most part, we've just thrown away. The source calls this a generational theft so quiet nobody noticed it happening. And that just hits hard. The skills to cook smart, to stretch ingredients, to literally create something from nothing, they were quietly traded for the convenience of opening a can. And an entire library of culinary wisdom was just forgotten. And that leaves us with this final, really thought-provoking question. You know, as we look at this, we have to ask ourselves, what if we really lost in the name of convenience? This isn't just about being nostalgic. It's about how we think about food waste, our own health, and the family traditions that get passed down, or the ones that don't. Which of these skills still even exist in our own families today? We would genuinely love to read about your own family's history down in the comments. I mean, which of these meals did your grandmother make? Are any of these recipes still alive in your kitchen? If you found this little journey into the past valuable, please hit that like button and subscribe to keep remembering with us. Thanks so much for watching.
All right, here we are. This is it, the grand finale of our series on forgotten meals. We have counted down from 30, and now we've reached the final 5. I mean, these are the absolute pinnacles of culinary genius, of turning practically nothing into a meal that could feed a family body and soul.
And this quote right here, it just perfectly sets the stage. The whole idea for this finale is that these women weren't cooking poor, you know? They were cooking smart. They had this incredible, deep-seated knowledge of their ingredients that, honestly, we're just now starting to remember. So let's count down the top 5 examples of their genius.
Okay, let's dive right in with number 5.
And this one is truly the bedrock of cooking for millions and millions of people.
Rice and gravy. I know. It sounds so simple, right? But it's a cornerstone of cooking in the rural South and especially in Louisiana. I mean, this is a truly profound meal where every single last drop of flavor from a cooking pan was captured, stretched out with a little water, and then transformed into this rich, savory gravy to pour over a simple bed of white rice.
And that's the absolute magic of it. The rice was dirt cheap, sure, but the pan drippings, they were free. They were just the delicious leftovers from whatever meat was cooked that day. And that was the genius of it, using every last bit of the cooking process to create something hearty and filling that kept entire families going.
Now for number 4. This is a meal with roots that go back centuries on this continent, passed down through generations of absolutely remarkable women.
Bean bread. This is pure wisdom, handed down from Cherokee grandmothers. It's a complete meal all in one brilliant little package. You just take cooked beans, like pinto or October beans, and you fold them right into a simple cornmeal dough. Then it gets shaped into rounds, and it's either boiled or, even better, wrapped in corn husks and cooked right over a fire.
And what you've got to understand is that this was so much more than just food. It was a tool for cultural and physical survival. You know, especially when government commodity foods were often nutritionally empty, this simple bread, just packed with protein and fiber, was an absolute lifeline.
Coming in at number 3 is a dish that's so incredibly effective that, get this, modern science has only just recently managed to confirm what grandmas knew all along.
Dried pea soup. Just 3 things. A bag of dried split peas, a leftover ham bone, and water. That's it. You let it simmer for hours and the peas just dissolve and thicken the whole thing, while that ham bone infuses the entire pot with this deep, smoky flavor. It ends up tasting like it has 20 ingredients in it.
And here's the kicker. A study from 2019 found that just one bowl of this soup, which would have cost about 14 cents back in 1940, meant nearly all of a person's daily nutritional needs. We're talking complete protein, fiber, B vitamins, iron, the whole shebang. It is a nutritional powerhouse born from literal scraps.
All right, let's move on to number 2. And this isn't just a dish. No way. This is the absolute foundation of an iconic American cuisine, born out of pure hardship and sheer brilliance.
Fatback and collard greens. This dish was created by enslaved people in the South. They were given the parts of the hog that nobody else wanted, like fatback, which is the pure, salt-cured fat from the back of the animal. They took that, dropped it into a pot of tough collard greens, and slow-cooked them into something unbelievably flavorful and tender.
And the soul of this dish is the pot liquor. See, as the greens cook for hours and hours, all their vitamins and minerals leach out into the cooking water. And that water also soaks up all the smoky saltiness from the fatback. This dark, incredibly nutrient-dense broth was never ever wasted. It was a meal in itself, usually sopped up with a piece of cornbread.
That quote just nails it. This isn't just about food, it's about the immense cultural weight, the culinary power of turning scraps, what others discarded, into the very heart of a cuisine. It is literally history in a bowl.
So before we get to our number 1, just think about that for a second. What's the one meal that represents the absolute bedrock of survival? The one that shows up at the end of a long day when the pantry is looking really, really bare?
And here it is. The meal that was eaten all across the rural South and Appalachia, to end the day when, truly, there was nothing else left. Number 1 is cornbread, milk, and onion. And like the source says, you can't really call this a recipe. It's more of a ritual, it's memory, it's the feeling of security right there in a glass.
Just picture this. You crumble up some leftover cornbread into a tall glass. Then you pour cold, tangy buttermilk all over it. And on the side, you've got a thin slice of sharp, raw onion. You take a spoonful of that softened cornbread, a sip of the buttermilk, that acid cuts right through the richness, and then you take a little bite of the onion for a sharp, clean finish. It's the perfect combination to just settle your stomach and call it a day.
You know, the real tragedy here is that when we lost these meals, we lost so much more than just recipes. We lost an entire system of knowledge about ingredients, about economy, about sheer survival. The source calls it a generational theft. And it was a quiet process. For decades, you had food companies marketing convenience, pushing their products as modern while framing scratch cooking as old-fashioned drudgery. This wasn't just about selling a few more cans of soup, it was about creating a whole new, more profitable food system.
And that incredible knowledge our grandmothers had, how to get 10 meals from one ham bone, how to make a salad out of dandelions, it was slowly replaced by the ability to operate a can opener.
And this, right here, is the key takeaway of our entire series. It is a huge mistake to look at these meals as just poor people food. They were the masterful creations of ingenious women who wasted absolutely nothing, who understood their ingredients on a molecular level, and who fed their families with pride and resourcefulness against all odds.
And that officially wraps up our series on the forgotten meals of our grandmothers. Now, we'd love to know which one of these meals is still alive in your family's memory. The dried pea soup? Maybe the bean bread? Or do you still have cornbread and buttermilk at the end of the day? Let us know down in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe for more stories just like this.